and gentlemen, and welcome to Obscura, the show where we look at the best and worst horror has to offer. I'm your host, the Fear Fan, and thanks for tuning in. Say, you know how there are some sequels that aren't just great movies, films that can outdo their predecessors by expanding the franchises they belong to, and by giving well-loved characters room to grow? Well, you can throw all that shit out the window, because today, we're watching Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, one of the most hated, reviled, and despised sequels ever made. But before we get into it, a bit of backstory. Up until now, the Nightmare on Elm Street series had never been anything other than a huge financial success, with each entry topping the previous one at the box office. But when Part 5 failed to reach the same level of success as the previous film, New Line Cinema decided that it might be time for their iconic slasher to hang up his glove for good. But just because they were going out didn't mean they weren't going out with a bang. When people learned that Freddy Krueger was going down for good, it touched off a media frenzy. New Line was quick to capitalize on the publicity, even going so far as to organize a funeral/cast reunion for the iconic killer. And of course, with a build-up like that, what else could New Line do except for fail miserably? Now, as I've said, this film is absolutely hated. So, did they at least try to make something the fans would enjoy, or should they have buried this movie instead of the main character? There's only one way to know for sure, so let's tune in and find out. As with previous entries, we start out with a quote about dreams and nightmares. I've never mentioned these before, but I've always thought they were a pretty cool way of setting the mood for what comes after. Which is why it should serve as a pretty big warning when they decide to stick in an out-of-context pun immediately afterward. Great, now we can't even get to the opening credits without Freddy cracking a joke. Well, let's move on to the plot. To be honest, I'm actually pretty interested in seeing how Alice, Yvonne, and her baby are doing since surviving the last movie. Great! They all died at some indeterminate point in the past. Thanks for that, movie! Seriously, Nancy got a hero's death at the end of Part 3, and Kristen was at least in Part 4 before they killed her and converted her corpse into plot fuel. And for those of you who are wondering, no, we never will get an explanation as to how Freddy got resurrected this time, or how he killed off the entire town's supply of children and teenagers. But I wouldn't worry too much about that. God knows the movie doesn't. Instead, it's too busy trying to introduce us to its main character, whose name is... Wow, can't you just feel the effort oozing off of this screenplay? Anyway, John Doe, God help us, is afraid of heights, and from the very beginning, it's obvious that he's not exactly the brightest bulb in the box.
It's not fair! I was almost out!
No, you're dreaming. And even if you weren't, Springwood doesn't exactly strike me as a major transportation hub. To be honest, you probably had to leave town to get on that plane in the first place. Anyway, having failed to keep his tray table up and his seat back in its full upright position, John is ejected from the plane. Fortunately, he wakes up to find that he's actually safe and sound at home in his own bed, which is unfortunately also plummeting several thousand feet through the air. Anyway, as John falls to his death, we hear a familiar laugh outside, and we all know what that means. Alright, idiot characters, badly placed puns, and a complete disrespect for the series up to this point aside, I'm willing to put all of that behind me as long as Freddy delivers. Come on, movie, give me something to enjoy.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little soul, too!
My God, it's like millions of fan expectations cried out in anguish, and were suddenly silenced. I mean, good God, I knew they were going to play up the comedy from that opening quote, but really? What happens next doesn't help matters. After a fall down a hill that would put Springfield Gorge to shame, John is hit by a bus which, unfortunately, fails to kill him. Instead, it just succeeds in knocking an idiot-shaped hole in the universe. I would compare this to a Roadrunner cartoon, but those are actually funny. Anyway, after John does his magical faceplant through the looking glass, we learn that Freddy is now inexplicably trapped within the borders of Springwood for reasons that were probably explained in the same non-existent movie that tells us how the characters from the last movie died, how Freddy came back to life, and why his makeup now looks more like chewed up bubblegum than burn scarring. Anyway, John's cracked his head on a rock, and as he wanders towards a neighboring town, we get the dubious honor of meeting the rest of the cast. Alright, I get that this movie's supposed to be a departure, but we need something to tie the whole series together. Some cohesive element that lets us all know that this is still the same series that we know and love.
I know you're hearing me. I put you in here because you give me no choice. Next time, I'll leave you here and walk away. Thanks for the visit, Dad.
Ah, shitty parenting. How I've missed your gentle caress. That's right, our main characters are all from a shelter for abused and delinquent kids. There's Spencer, a stoner with daddy issues, Tracy, a girl with anger management problems and even bigger daddy issues, and Carlos, a deaf kid with mommy issues, who is definitely not played by John Leguizamo, no matter how hard he tries to get you to believe otherwise.
You know, you are sexy when you sweat.
Anyway, we learn that these three Rhodes Scholars are planning on running away from the shelter, and we get to meet the staff psychiatrist, Maggie. We are also introduced to Doc, who, believe it or not, is their designated dream therapist. Our tax dollars at work, people. So it seems that Doc is trying to treat the kid's most deep-seated traumas with dream therapy. It turns out that Maggie is having some problems of her own, and Doc offers to lend her a hand.
You give me half the chance, I can help you with your little problem.
I don't have a little problem. I just have a little reoccurring dream, and I'm handling it fine.
Yep, she's down to killing only 2 hookers a month. That is a huge improvement. Anyway, after she's done getting defensive, she notices a new and conveniently placed poster on the wall. Fortunately, Doc is kind enough to offer her an explanation. Unfortunately, that explanation is incredibly lame.
These are ancient dream demons. Supposedly, they roam the dreams of the living till they find the most evil, twisted human imaginable. Then they give them the power to cross the line and turn our nightmares into reality.
Good God, they founded the Young Republicans? Anyway, with that vital piece of exposition out of the way, we see that John has been brought in by the police. Maggie questions him about who he is and where he comes from, but it turns out that knock on the head earlier has given him amnesia. Although John doesn't remember much about his life, he does remember that if he falls asleep, he won't be waking up. A sentiment that I'm sure the audience shares at this point. So later that night, we get a look at the complex and layered psyches of our main characters, which in Maggie's case amounts to a game of tag with her dad. Meanwhile, in a much more interesting dream, which isn't really saying much to be honest, John finds himself back in the Elm Street house. While that would normally be the cue for Freddy to show up and for awesomeness to ensue, this movie has something much more frightening in mind: the innermost workings of John's mind.
Free me, you idiot! I'm your fucking memory! Ah!
Dude, your memory's kind of a dick. Bonus points for knocking the guard out the window, though.
Asshole.
Anyway, having managed to bore the audience out of their minds, the main characters finally decide to go in search of a plot. Maggie and John realize that they're both dreaming of Springwood, and decide to head there to see if they can spark his memory, which will most likely proceed to call him an asshole again. Anyway, on the drive there, John freaks out and nearly wrecks the car, revealing that Spencer, Tracy, and Carlos were trying to escape in the back.
What the hell are you guys doing here?
Don't be too mad, Maggie. They were just trying to escape the movie, and to be honest, who can blame them? Seriously, no matter what you say about the previous entries, at least you can't accuse them of being this boring. Anyway, Maggie pulls over into the town fair, and being a responsible child welfare worker, immediately sends the 3 runaways off to contact the shelter. Alone. Who knows, maybe she's realized that nothing's happening in this movie and thinks they're safe. But whatever the case, she should have been more careful, because it's here, at this carnival, that we find the true terror of this movie. Terrible acting.
Oh, what beautiful, adorable children! Would you like to come and live with us?
It's been so long since we've had children in the house. So long. This time, I swear it'll be different. This time, I'll be careful and I'll hide you better so that he'll never find you. Mickey, what'd you do?
And before you ask, yes, that was Roseanne Barr. Also, there's a brief appearance by Tom Arnold. Rumor has it that they were constantly making out on set, but thankfully there isn't any footage of that. Hey, I may be desperate for something horrifying to happen, but God knows I'll never be that desperate. Anyway, Maggie, once again exercising brilliant judgment, gathers up the kids and drives them back to the shelter. Nah, just kidding. She hands them the keys and tells them to head back to the shelter despite the fact that A, they probably don't have so much as a learner's permit between them, and B, she just caught them trying to escape. Worst social worker ever. Of course, much to my amazement, the kids actually try to follow her orders. However, since this movie cannot allow such common sense to prevail, they find that no matter what turn they take, they always find themselves back at the exact same intersection. Carlos tries to use a map, but unfortunately, all he finds inside is a message about his future acting career. Wow, what do you know? A scene that serves as a perfect metaphor for this movie. A long, winding path that goes nowhere with an insulting message at the end. Elsewhere, John and Maggie head to the school, which, surprise surprise, now looks nothing like it did in the first two movies. After encountering yet more terrible acting, they learn that Freddy Krueger actually had a wife and child. Because, as we all know, pedophile serial killers are such family-oriented people. But anyway, while they continue their search for a plot, let's see if our other characters have accomplished anything.
There's no way out.
Not with you driving.
Yeah, well, you didn't do much better.
No, but at least I didn't have the time.
Wow, they've literally been driving in circles for the last 6 hours. Somehow, I'm not surprised. Eventually, they either realize that they're getting nowhere, or more likely they just run out of gas. Either way, our three intrepid idiots decide to bed down for the night by breaking into an abandoned house. After Tracy kicks down the door, hard enough to make it bleed I might add, the house remodels itself into a much more familiar form. None of our characters seem to notice though, so it's off to bed, and thankfully that means that it's finally Freddy time as Carlos drifts off.
Carlos!
Tracy?
Carlos!
Tracy? Tracy! Tracy, where are you?
Behind you.
Tracy, the years have aged you horribly. As you've probably already guessed, it's Freddy, and once he reveals himself, he proceeds to prove something that I have long suspected about these characters. Just as I thought, Carlos literally had nothing between his ears. What follows is easily the best sequence in the movie, with Freddy first taunting Carlos with his own deafness, then torturing him by cranking up the volume. The whole sequence is actually lit like a horror movie, to the point where the crappy makeup job on Freddy actually looks halfway decent, and it actually has an effective blend of horror and comedy.
Nice hearing from you, Carlos.
Right up until the shitty one-liner at the end at least. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, because it's the last decent thing in this movie. So Maggie and John head to the local orphanage, where John reveals that he thinks he may be Freddy's missing child. We get yet more terrible acting from the lady who runs the orphanage, and I really have to wonder what happened to all the people who didn't have kids. I mean, did they go crazy too, or did they just move away when they realized that not only were their neighbors nuts, but that they were also terrible actors? Before I can speculate further on how shitty acting affects property values, Tracy shows up and asks them to come back and help look for Carlos. Back at the house, Spencer learns that despite being reduced to human mulch in the first movie, Glenn's actually doing pretty well for himself in the PSA business.
This is your brain on drugs. Questions?
I would make a crack about how this is your brain on Freddy's Dead, but for that to be true, the pan would not only have to be on fire, but also covered in spikes. Anyway, Freddy shows up and drags Spencer into the dream world as Tracy arrives with Maggie and John. Rather than arriving in some sort of drug-themed dream world, as the previous sequence would have you believe, Spencer instead finds himself trapped in what is, without a doubt, the shittiest video game I've ever seen. And with that, we enter what is, in my opinion, the shittiest scene not just in this movie, but in the entire franchise. As Freddy guides Spencer through the retardedly fake-looking game, he manages to find a level of comedy below the pun, simply making stupid faces at the camera in a vain and desperate attempt to amuse the audience. And that's nothing compared to what happens when we get back to the waking world, where Freddy continues to control Spencer's body from inside the dream. Say, remember when I compared this movie to a Roadrunner cartoon? Well, apparently they took that to heart, because this is what happens next. Keep in mind, I have made no alterations to this footage. All audio and video is exactly as it was presented to the audience. To the untrained ear, those sound like wacky cartoon sound effects. But to me, that's the sound that Dignity makes when it dies. Anyway, John and Tracy realize that they need to go into the dream world to save Spencer, and after Tracy proves that dreams really do come true in this series by smashing John in the face with a table leg, they find Freddy. Out of puns at last, it appears that he's been reduced to shouting out random onomatopoeias.
Bam! Splash!
Oh shit, Spencer! Come on, John. Good job. Get out of here now, Tracy. Now.
Hey! You forgot the power glove!
Wow, way to reference one of the crappiest video game peripherals ever made. Now, if there was only some way for me to reference it and offer a critique of this movie in a single line.
It's so bad.
That'll do. So Freddy, continuing to get his onomatopoeia on, drops Spencer down a flight of steps and into the colon of eternal torment. Tracy, incensed at the loss of another minor character, does to Freddy what this film did to the rest of the franchise. Let's face it, he kind of had that coming. Anyway, before Freddy can recover, Tracy wakes up and finally convinces Maggie that it might be time to leave. They toss John, who is apparently a very sound sleeper, into the back of their van and haul ass through the town limits. After more dream within a dream antics than you can shake a Christopher Nolan at, John finds himself cornered by Freddy, who proceeds to reveal the truth about John.
Oh, do you think I'm your daddy? Wrong!
Wait a second.
Wrong! Wrong!
Well, at least I get a new running gag out of this. Anyway, Kruger reveals that his child was actually a girl, and that he plans on using her to get out of town. He cuts John loose, and after a few more cartoonish antics, John is killed. And I've gotta say, they actually try to play his death for pathos rather than laughs. What, no cartoon sound effects? Much better. Although with what happens next, they might as well have done it with the sound effects. As Freddy absorbs John's soul, we get to see what I can only assume is Freddy's O-face, and he lets us know what happens to all those souls he consumes.
You forgot where you came from, kid. But I know where you're going.
Dude, did you just threaten to poop out his soul? Ew! So Freddy tucks himself away inside of Maggie's mind, and she and Tracy head back to the shelter. Maggie tries to explain to her boss what happened to 3 of the kids who were in her care, but finds out that it may not be necessary.
I'm talking about Carlos and Spencer and the John Doe. Kelly, they just disappeared.
Been handling too many cases, Maggie. Those kids were never here.
Jeez, I know they're the most forgettable batch of characters in the series, but still. Nope, the movie's not retconning itself. Instead, it turns out that Freddy now has the completely unexplained power to make people forget his victims. Who knows? If I ask real nice, maybe he'll let me forget this movie. Anyway, Maggie learns that she's actually Freddy's daughter, and when she falls asleep that night, she finally remembers finding her dad's workshop, and Freddy gets what is probably his one good line in this entire movie.
Time to start all over again.
But this isn't Springwood.
Every town has an Elm Street.
Classic. Anyway, Kruger apparently still wants revenge for his aching balls, and to that end he comes after Tracy disguised as her molesting father. However, things don't go exactly as planned.
No honey for daddy.
I should think that would be obvious from the fact that your skull is now concave. Anyway, Tracy tries to beat Kruger with her martial arts skills, but Freddy's apparently learned a thing or two since Alice kicked his ass in part 4 and is easily able to fend her off. Tracy manages to wake herself up, and together she and Maggie rush to find Doc. Unfortunately, Freddy's already made it there first, and he proceeds to prove that he has been taking some lessons lately.
How about this, Doc?
Jesus, no wonder he kicked Rick's ass in part 4. But Doc isn't such easy prey, for he has discovered Freddy's one true weakness: blunt instruments. course, it doesn't stick, and Freddy, apparently in an expository mood after his ass kicking, finally reveals the source of his powers.
But I just keep on ticking. Because they promised me that.
They?
The dream people. The ones that gave me this job.
That's right, Freddy didn't return from the grave for revenge against the people who killed him, or because his will was stronger than the icy grip of death itself. Nope, it was because the 3 dream demons from that stupid-looking poster decided that he was the most evil man in the world. Thanks for that, movie. You've managed to ruin not only the franchise, but also the very concept that the franchise was based on. I hope that you're pleased with yourself. Yeah, what am I saying? Of course you are. So Doc rips off a piece of Freddy's shirt before he wakes up, and our 3 survivors realize that they can drag Freddy into the real world. Since Maggie's mind is tied into Freddy's, they figure that they can send her in to get inside of his head and pass his mental defenses. And this leads us into what was supposed to be the film's key sequence, shot in glorious stereoscopic 3D, because hey, if you're going to insult the shit out of your audience, you might as well give them severe eye strain while you're at it. Anyway, I have, at great personal expense, managed to acquire a pair of stereoscopic 3D glasses. So, let's see what stunning feats of cinematography they managed to achieve using this revolutionary technology. Wow, it's like I'm actually watching a shitty movie! Anyway, she travels into Freddy's mind, which could apparently use a good sweeping out, and encounters the Dream Demons, which are every bit as retarded as you would think. We get a good look at Freddy's childhood, including his days as a hamster smashing enthusiast, and even a glimpse of Freddy's father.
You ready for it, boy?
Wow, Alice Cooper was his dad? No wonder he's so messed up. Anyway, he kills his father with a cheesy 3D effect, we get to see more of the retarded dream tadpoles, and then we finally find out what happened to Maggie's mother.
Don't worry, baby. Mommy just had to take her medicine for snooping in Daddy's special work.
Unfortunately, I'm not very good at administering Benadryl, and she is now dead. So Maggie finally finds Kruger and manages to drag him back. Unfortunately, he appears elsewhere in the building, and after she, Tracy, and Doc arm up with a variety of crappy 3D effects, Maggie finds herself trapped in a storage room with Freddy. And so, here we have it, the death of Freddy Krueger. Now, as bad as this movie's been up to this point, this at least has to be awesome, right? What we get instead is a lame fistfight, a demonstration of Maggie's hitherto unmentioned ninja-like knife-throwing skills, and Freddy's demise comes as the result of a well-placed pipe bomb. Cue lame-ass one-liner, and we fade to black as the movie insults us one last time by showing clips from not 1, not 2, but 5 different movies that are all better than this one. And that's Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare, and I've got to say, this movie fails on every conceivable level. The story's slow, the special effects are mostly well done, but wasted on sequences that are downright silly, and although the main cast are decent actors, the supporting cast are just awful enough to overshadow them. And as if all that wasn't bad enough, this movie seems to delight in ignoring everything that's come before it. I mean, I really have to question whether the people who wrote this movie watched any of the previous films at all. Take for example the fact that Freddy's stuck in Springwood. Why? Freddy Krueger doesn't haunt a place, he haunts people. First the Elm Street children, then any victim he could reach through Alice, Kristen, and Jacob's dreams. In fact, I've got to say that that seems to be the film's biggest flaw. Not that it breaks from canon, but that it doesn't seem to actually understand who or what Freddy Krueger is, let alone how to use him to effectively scare an audience. And because they didn't know jack about how to handle the character, the end result is a film that retcons the series for no discernible purpose, that changes the tone from horror to humor for no reason, and that serves as an almost personal slap in the face to every fan who watches it. Poor saps who are just hoping to get a satisfactory conclusion to what was a pretty good series. Anyway, New Line intended this to be the last film in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, and in a sense they succeeded. Every film since Freddy's Dead has either been a spin-off or a remake, and although this film may have killed off the main franchise, it's good to know that the series, just like Freddy Krueger himself, always finds a way of coming back to life. Anyway, that's all we have time for this week, so tune in next time as I take a look at another potentially franchise-breaking sequel, Godzilla 1985. Until then, this is the Fear Fan, signing out.
Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Make him the cutest that I've ever seen. Give him two lips like roses and clover. Then tell him that his lonesome nights are over. Sandman, I'm so alone. Don't have nobody to call my own. Please turn on your magic beam. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Bum 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 bum.